Thanks, David. Hi, good morning. We are very fortunate to have John Barton here this morning, a friend and colleague. John is by profession an architect, and he is also director of the architectural design program at Stanford University. He's a founding member of the community working group of Palo Alto that establishes public-private partnerships to build affordable housing. He is also currently a board member of the community working group. He's a board member of the Silicon Valley Housing Trust and has a long track record of effective work on behalf of affordable housing, and it's just a great pleasure to welcome John Barton. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. Turn these lights down just a little bit. Is that too dark? Is that okay? Well, thank you very much, Margot. A couple of introductory comments. Some of you may see my handshake. I have a tremor on the left side of my body, or right side of my body that was diagnosed a couple of years ago. It's not a big deal, but it's a chance for my kids to agree with my doctors that there's something wrong with my head. They've known it for a long time. And then the second thing is I grew up in Los Altos. I went to Oak Avenue Elementary School for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Went to Block Middle School. I would have gone to what I still think of as AWOL High School, which is now Mountain View High School. But I went to prep school, but my three brothers and my sister all went there. And then my mom and dad lived in the house there back of Mountain View High School for many more years than my mom moved out about 4 or 5 years ago. Lives in Saratoga now. But I used to come to this library. My 4-H meetings were in the community building over there, so it's fun to be back here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about affordable housing, some updates on some cool things that are happening, but still the significant challenges and why we all need to be working within our communities to build affordable housing. As Margot said, I'm the director of the architectural design program at Stanford, but most of my housing experience comes from being a founding member of the community working group, which built the Opportunity Center in Palo Alto and 801 Alma. And we just did what's called a strategic alliance with the boat services. So we're strategizing to be going to the next 20 years of our lives as an organization in an even better place. And then I've been for the last 8 or 10 years board member of the Housing Trust in Silicon Valley. We'll talk a little bit about a really unique project that we've been working on there down the road. My voice drops off just sitting to me. I've been a teacher for 30 years, but I don't have teacher voice. So we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges that create an affordable housing challenge, the actual fallout of that challenge. Talk about some solutions and some ways of thinking about solutions, and then some of the things that are on the future for us in this part. So let's talk about some challenges. First off, and you all know this, we've got a booming economy for the last 7 years or so, and realistically a booming economy for the last 50 years with intermittent economic downturns. But real wages have dropped. So in 1972, a 35 to 44-year-old could make $35,000 adjusted income. In 2012, that had effectively dropped. But of course, prices and material costs have gone up. The middle class has withered in the United States as a result of this. Those of us who are of a certain age, I worry for my children who are 28 and 25 that what was normal for my generation will be something they have to fight for. And it's not because the economy has gotten particularly bad, it's because we've developed this alarming inequality that those at the top are making a lot more than they used to, taking a bigger chunk of the treasure that comes from our economy. we're going to see some population changes. We're seeing them already. In 2015, we were 7.5 million. By 2040, I guess we'll be close to 10 million. Santa Clara County is going to experience the largest percentage growth, according to the Association of Bay Area Government. So we've got economic lagging, we've got inequality, and then we've got more people coming who want to live here. And they're going to come with low-paying jobs. About half of them will have low-paying jobs. More than half the jobs will pay less than $11 an hour. And we think that the rise of high tech will be our savior, but it's going to exacerbate the problem. If this guy's claims has even close to true, we're going to have a challenge. So what are some of the fallouts of this? What happens when we don't pay attention to this? For us, it means that poverty rates are going up. 60% of California, Santa Clara County residents are low income or very low income. And we just don't see it. Particularly those of us who live in Los Altos, Palo Alto, Stanford, we don't see what happens in East San Jose, or even in pockets of our own neighborhoods. So I was a city council member in Palo Alto. Palo Alto has schools where well over 10 or 20% of the students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. These folks are in our community that they're paid. We had a 13% uptick in the number of homeless people between 2013 and 2015. You might have been able to understand that between 2008 and 2009, and 2008 and 2010, but the economy was moving along. We're just not finding places for these folks to live. So the other thing that this means is that beyond just the poverty is housing is just simply unaffordable. My son and daughter, my older son and daughter-in-law, they make good money, but they moved to Boise because they could buy a house. If they were to buy a house here, they'd be strapped to that mortgage for the rest of their life. So 38%, 4 in 10, basically, households in Santa Clara County are what's called rent burden under HUD, where you're spending more than 30% of your gross income on housing costs. You can argue it's an arbitrary number, but it's a number that's been around for a long time, and it's a number that the banks and the lending agencies use when qualifying for folks. Rents and purchase prices are increasing about 8%. Actually, it's probably a little higher. Any realtors in the room? It's probably closer to 10 or 12% right now, certainly in Palo Alto. And as we've seen, wages are flat. So an average renting family of 4 would need to make $90,000 to stay under the 30% mark for an average rent a few years ago. But most jobs are going to pay $11 an hour, 5 or 6 new jobs. So they're making, if you're making minimum wage, or you're making $11 an hour, it's well over the minimum wage, you're still only making $22,000 a year. The gap is not, oh, here's a little bit of a gap, we can come together and solve this problem. This is a massive gap, a massive gap. In 2013, condos, mid-range price is probably closer to $1 million now. You have to find $150,000 to put down. My kids didn't have $150,000. I don't have $150,000 to put down on a house. And monthly payments approaching $3,000 a month, plus property taxes. If I sold my house in Palo Alto today, Prop 15 has many great things about it, but if I sold my house in Palo Alto today and moved around the corner to the same size house on a quieter street for the same price, my property taxes would go from $5,000 a year to $50,000. So these prices are not, we have to remember that the Prop 13 penalty for new, particularly young families buying in at these high rates. But there's a whole series of social issues when our housing is this expensive and hard on families. One is our police officers, firefighters, EMTs, teachers, they live a long way away. And when the earthquake comes or a major fire event comes, they're not going to be able to get to their jobs as quickly as we might like. Workers are driving out from Atwater or Tracy or Los Banos to come to work in the Bay Area every day. I know one person who commutes from Sacramento. So they're not seeing their families. They're getting up at 4 a.m., they're getting home at 8, going to bed, and they see their families on the weekend. The rent burden tend to live in places that don't have as good a school system, and that perpetuates poverty. So if your family can't afford to have the greatness of a Los Altos school system or Palo Alto school system, you're out in Atwater or someplace like that, the chances that your kids can go to college are going to decline. The less affluent live further away from healthcare, and they're going to use the emergency room for their healthcare, which costs all of us in our insurance costs. And economically, without workers, if they can't work here, business will just simply go someplace else. Or they'll outsource, or they'll build little pockets in Boise and little pockets in Pittsburgh. And that's not good for us as well. But let's turn the problems into solutions. And hopefully I won't offend anybody with where I'm going with this. But I think part of solutions comes with an attitude. The government needs to be part of our solution to this. And the government is not always a bad thing. I say this as a former school board member, former city council member, and somebody who ran for state assembly. Government can, in fact, address inequality through tax and policy efforts. It's not going to happen in the Los Altos City Council. It's not going to happen in the Palo Alto City Council. But some of it can happen at the state assembly, and it can happen with our legislature at the national level. As long as we and our neighbors across the world, across the country, get together to elect folks who are willing to at least have a conversation about this. Cutting the tax code from 18 to 4 brackets and giving a huge tax cut to the rich is not tax policy thinking. And then at the state and local level, there's planning and zoning efforts. We were talking for a few minutes before here about one, just thinking about how do you incentivize at the local level building affordable housing, increasing densities, increasing heights, decreasing costs, streamlining permitting processes. And this can happen at the local level. Another attitude is let's remember, and we're going to talk about our housing in a moment. We've all benefited from our community. We've all had mentors, friends, associations. I'm standing in front of you. I get to teach at Stanford because my father went to Stanford Law School, was a Stanford Law School professor, allowed me to go to prep school. I went to Cal when it cost $150 a quarter. This state gave me a college education. I don't forget that. And it's real easy when we go out into the world and somebody says, well, I pulled myself up by my bootstrap. Well, most of us really didn't. We all worked hard. We took advantage of what we had, but we had the advantage of what we had. And that shows up when we talk about subsidized housing. So if you're at a cocktail party and somebody says, well, why should we subsidize housing? We all live in subsidized housing. This chart is really kind of scary. So expenditures in billions of dollars, annual billions of dollars to support housing. It includes tax deductions, property tax deductions, and mortgage interest deductions. Those of us who make more than $200,000 a year are getting 3 times what those who make less than $10,000 a year are getting. Yet, 0% of them are rent burdened. And I'm wondering what these guys, they must be buying some super expensive houses. But look at the shape of this curve. 6.6 million households at 15.2 million, 0.0 households in terms of their cost burden get $43.9 billion. But look at the shape of this curve here. And the jump is going back to that inequity compensation before. Yeah, it'd be one thing if it was a straight curve, but we're paying a little lip service to these folks, and then we're screwing over the middle class, and then we're giving everything to the upper middle class. So when people complain about affordable housing, you can say you live in the most subsidized housing there is in the country right now. Get involved in your local nonprofits. Community Working Group is in Palo Alto, Abode Services is in East Bay, Mid-Peninsula Housing, Palo Alto Housing Corp, and others. They're doing a whole range of cool things, from developer assistance loans, pre-development loans, helping develop tax credit and rent subsidies. They're working on zoning incentive in various communities. The Housing Trust has down payment assistance programs, closing costs. There's a whole range of little niche programs that you could be involved with in funding them, involved in with nonprofit committees or boards, and you will learn so much about the difficulties and the challenges and the complexities of financing affordable housing that will go a long way to helping develop that. So let's talk about some things that have happened recently, which I think are bode well for the future. We lost a lot of money when redevelopment agencies went away. We haven't fully recovered that, and we're finding our way in the dark a little bit. But a couple of really great things have happened. First of all, in November, we all agreed in Santa Clara County by just over 2/3 to 1/3 to tax ourselves to build a bond, general obligation bond of $950 million, just shy of $1 billion, that will build 5,000 units and help support 1,000 first-time home buyers over the next some period of time. It's a little unclear. It's a general obligation bond, so it can be sold at different times. And the county will work with their bond counsel on the most opportune time to sell and finance those bonds. But I think what heartened me about this was it came not long after a really stinging rebuke of affordable housing in Palo Alto a few years ago when Palo Alto Housing Corp lost a referendum to build a modest number of senior affordable housing units. And the community came unglued, and it was ugly, and it was not the community that I recognized. I have gone back to look at what the vote in Palo Alto was on Measure A, but there's a lot of voters in Palo Alto, so I'm guessing that they came back to their senses. But this is big time opportunity for every community to take a look at how it can leverage those funds. This week, literally on Monday, the governor signed a package of bills, and I just highlight a few of them. The state has been loath to get involved at the local level. Local control is a mantra that school board members and city council members go to a lot. The state shouldn't tell us how to handle it, we're closest to it. But the reality is that what's happened in many, many cities, Palo Alto of late is one of them, is they've just put up barriers to affordable housing. They've changed the zoning, they've made the approvals processes really hard. They've done things to make sure that they get referended, and they haven't supported their own decisions. And the state's been loath to jump into that for two reasons. One is they don't want to mess with their elected constituents, but they've also been, in terms of the financing, been afraid of some of the forces that would fight back. And I think we've seen a corner turn at the legislature in both of those. The first is this real estate transfer fee, and they came to an agreement with the realtors to allow a fee on non-purchase transfers, so refis, transfers after death, things like that, that puts a modest fee on that transfer, and it's going to raise between $200 and $300 million a year in perpetuity for affordable housing. It's the camel's nose under the tent for the realtors, and I think at some point we can look ahead to a transfer tax on actual single-family home purchases, and even just a few dollars per thousand or 100,000 would develop a huge pool of funds for affordable housing. We're going to vote as a state on a $4 billion housing bond in November of next year, which is exciting. And I'm not sure that needs 2/3, but I'd have to double check that. There's a bill that, as many of you know, every city has to have a housing element, and they have to have goals for building affordable housing. Those have been strawman, and a lot of cities have just said, well, we'll put some housing over here. Well, now if you don't meet those goals, you're going to get punished in terms of some of your tax funding. It allows cities to create housing zones that would expedite approvals, which is new. It increases the burden of proof to deny housing, and this is going to be great because too often housing gets denied for coded language around those people, read not white, or and this is going to make it a lot harder for cities to play that game. There's cities don't have their general plans scrutinized very well now. The Attorney General can be referred to, cities can have their general plans referred to the Attorney General if they're not in conformance. And the one that I love the most is SB 166. So when I was on the city council, we would identify the sites, and too often they were a dream. There was a parking garage there, or there were already 4 buildings there. It was never going to become affordable housing. Well, now you actually have to have sites that are real. You have to actually rezone them for that and begin to move in the direction of converting those to housing, and those are what you're going to identify. And then another great one, do you guys know what inclusionary zoning is? Inclusionary zoning is if I allow you to build 10 units on this property as a city, 2 of them have to be affordable. It's usually in the neighborhood of 15%. There was this court case a few years ago that ruled that was illegal for rental housing. The legislature overturned that court decision and now allows cities to require, if they so choose, to require inclusionary zoning in their approaches. So there's two thoughts on this package of bills. One is the governor, he's got another year left. He's done everything he's going to do on housing, and we're not going to see any more changes, and we don't know who the next governor is. I'm not sure I'm that cynical. The optimistic view is, wow, the legislature got on board and did some stuff and pushed back against some powerful constituents who didn't want these things to happen because they see the need for this. We'll see where it goes. The Housing Trust Silicon Valley is taking a different approach. We're in the process of building a $50 million fund for a tech company. And out of that, we would provide short-term loans, and we think over the course of a few years, we can create 10,000 new homes. And because it's short-term loans for down payment assistance and developer assistance, the money comes back in. So the good thing about a bond of $1 billion, the county bond, is it's $1 billion. The bad news is it's money. Once the money leaves the bond, it goes into construction. It stays in that. So we don't get, we get about the same number of housing units out of that as we get out of this. We need to get more out of this because the money comes back to us, and then we pay a modest return to our investors, but we keep the difference, and then suddenly that power of this fund keeps growing and growing and growing over time. So this is something brand new, something we've been working on for a while. I know we're not at $50 million yet. I think we're at $20 million, but it's only taken us about 4 months to get there. And at some point, we'll be able to announce the companies that have given substantial sums of money to this. I think this is another good sign that in the post-redevelopment era, we're beginning to look at new ways of financing housing. And we're going into business and saying, look, you need to participate in this problem. You're bringing in these, every time you hire this guy, you're bringing in 5 unskilled jobs to our community. You need to be part of this solution. And they're backing that at the $2 to $10 million a piece. Now, Google or Apple or Facebook has $10 million to throw around. But we'll see how this goes and we'll develop, I think, new spin-off ideas. I also think we can look at, talk about the good things that happen when we build affordable housing. And we're seeing that. We know from multiple studies that when incomes are mixed in a community, that community has higher property values. It's counter to every argument. The case could be when an affordable housing project went up down the street from my house in Palo Alto, our property values zoomed up. Part of that was it was a vacant lot. It just improved the neighborhood. But part of it is it added vibrancy in kids and a new attitude to the neighborhood. Building housing is good for the local economy. It employs folks, and we need to build a lot of housing. Workers contribute less to air pollution, going back to the housing trust piece. We think that there's 56 million fewer miles per year just about building 10,000 homes. That's going to have a huge effect on traffic and air pollution. If you have a shorter commute, you spend more time with your community. I have the shortest commute in the world. I live in a dorm on Stanford campus. I point my bike down the hill in the morning and I climb it fiercely on my hill. But it means that I can see the kids in the dorm, which is my community right now, very quickly. I can engage with them in certain ways that if I lived in Stockton, I would not be able to engage with my students in the same way. Well, we'll talk about this. So, quick summary, and then we'll take some questions and discussion. We have rising inequality and unacceptable poverty amongst our own communities. We're spending too much on our housing, we're traveling too far to get to work. Our population is going to grow, and most jobs are going to pay less than what we're used to. That's kind of the bad news. But the solutions are going to make life better for all of us. If we come together, work in our nonprofits, work to develop interesting and innovative, affordable housing techniques, we're going to have a better community. We're going to have better health. We're going to have a better environment and better economy. And real change is happening. We're seeing it in Sacramento. We're seeing it in the nonprofit sector. And I truly believe we can build the community we want. We just have to get to work. So, thank you very much for your attention. Take some questions or some discussion.
As an overview on this, we live in a town of 35,000 people, give or take, with a limited amount of property under the control of the government, and most of it residential, already built out at high values. How do you start to develop policies at that level within the local community?
Well, I think first you have to decide that you want to build affordable housing, and then you can go about developing strategies. In a built-out community like Los Altos or Palo Alto, there's always land available in some form or another. There's parking lots that the city owns, or that a tax increment organization owns. There's The state allows, Los Altos has a lot of big lots, so it'd be very easy to put grandmother units in the back of those. So developing policies to allow you to effectively double the units per large parcel. And the state has a policy that they wrote a few years ago that actually tells the cities you have to do it if you meet certain guidelines. And Los Altos ought to be able to do that and incentivize that. And there's technologies coming on. We're fooling around with some at Abode and Community Working Group, where prefabricated, where you pour a foundation, crane in the unit, drop it in the backyard, and it's a few hundred square feet. And it could be a great place for a graduate student to live, or a young professional, or an elderly person for a short period of time. But it would allow them to live in the community, in that's one place. The other is a more aggressive attitude, which says, and I'm just using this as an example, I'm not saying this is the right thing, and this is your town, I don't live in Los Altos, but downtown is 1 and 2 stories. What if you were really serious about building affordable housing, and you said, let's build affordable housing on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors of a reconfigured downtown? You could do that. You'd have to build community support to do that, but you could do that. The other thing to do is say, and I'm still confused about where Palo Alto, Los Altos, and Mountain View come together at San Antonio. But that's a transportation link, and why not say that's a boulevard? What if we built to 70 feet on either side of that, and we put in high density housing there? These can be scary things because they involve change, but imagine what El Camino could be like if it was a true boulevard in the urban design sense of the word, where it had had a park strip down the middle, a wide sidewalk, and tall buildings. We go to Paris because we like tall buildings on either side of the street with a nice sidewalk. El Camino Real could be great. One of the reasons El Camino Real is so unattractive is it's got holes in it, 1 story here, 2 stories there, and a parking lot here. But if we could build densely there, not only would we build affordable housing, we'd be building a better environment as well. Yeah.
Does the package of bills that the governor signed give local elected officials, it's not really a cop-out, but an opportunity to say when they face the NIMBYs and opposition about higher density or affordable housing projects, to say, gee, sorry folks, the state is making us do this, we have no discretion? Or are there still options for local officials to kind of skirt around the goals and objectives of the state?
I think we'll find out. The bills go, I'm not sure exactly when the bills go into effect. Probably January.
Urgency. I don't
think any of them were urgency.
Okay, then it would be January.
So it'd be probably January. It'll be interesting to see what the City Attorneys Association says about what folks can and can't do, and whether any cities try to balk or take them to court on local control issues. My gut tells me, I think I'm going to add a third category to your one attitude that could happen. The city council could say, look, the state's getting serious about this, and so we need to go to work. Even if it's the version of, well, I know you don't want this, it's not what I want, and the state is requiring it. I'm willing to accept that if it gets us more housing. But I think groups like Housing Trust and nonprofit housing and other spur are going to be watching cities pretty carefully over the next couple of years to see how they try to wiggle out of this. There was an idea that I heard floated that a couple of nonprofits are thinking about for the next legislature, which would be to create a state overlay for transit zones. Essentially, allow the state to come in and say in Palo Alto, take 50 feet either side of the railroad station for did some land, and basically say, you're done, city of Palo Alto, you don't get to zone that anymore. State owns that zoning rights. And you're gonna have to build affordable housing there. That would be an aggressive move, but the very fact that people are talking about it is cool. Yeah.
In a city like Los Altos, which really doesn't have any housing funds and they haven't even adopted impact fees yet, do you see any way of building an all-affordable project unless it's on city-owned land? Any feasible way to get that done?
No. The challenge for affordability is you're trying to make the rents as small as possible. So all of your construction costs, land acquisition costs have to be small. There's great contractors and great architects who can do good work and keep construction costs to a minimum, but the land costs are horrific. And you need more, the more units you have, the more you can amortize the construction costs against those units. So you need a larger parcel. So when we built 801 Alma in downtown Palo Alto, we assembled 3 parcels, 2 from the city and 1 from private. But we paid $16 million an acre for private property.
Say that again, please.
We paid $16 million an acre. We didn't buy a full acre, but we spent $4 million for a quarter of an acre. And the only reason that the project penciled at the extremely low income level it did is the other 2 parcels came from the city for free. And they were probably 2/3 of the cost. So we bought whatever that is, 3/4 of an acre for $4 million, where it should have cost us 12 million, something like that. So finding a big enough piece of property, finding a developer who's got really good tax credit chops, or finding some other additional subsidies is the only way it's going to happen.
You know, we're already twisting ourselves in knots here with all of these laws that have to be passed, and there's a reason. Affordable housing just isn't really affordable. It's just so expensive, and that's what Sue is getting at here. There's no impact fees. There's nothing that's really providing the funding. So that's the root of it. I looked at the accessory dwelling units, for example. I mean, most people don't want a grand unit in their backyard. They don't want a stranger sharing their backyard with them. And so that's why most of them that are built in Los Altos are for family and special situations. But if you just look at the numbers, it's $400,000 or $500,000 to build a little cottage in the backyard, and the rents that you would have to charge for that are just, it's not affordable anymore.
Well, there's some technologies now we think we can get that unit built for about $150,000. I mean, it's still in the works, but I would say respectfully, this is unaffordable. Affordable, I mean, what the federal government is spending $45 billion a year subsidizing people who make more than $200,000 a year.
Well, we need to tap that income. That's the source of money.
That's the source of money, right? If we flopped this and said that maybe one thought in tax rethinking is that mortgage tax deduction is graduated. You get more for lesser income and less for higher income, or it's graduated based on some methodology, so that these things can swap. Because I keep coming back to this, because when we say affordable housing isn't affordable, it's absolutely affordable if we decide to spend money to do it. And we have to do it as a community, because we can't afford to have, in the long run, have non-white people mostly commuting long distances, spending time away from their family, spending time away from good health care, spending time away from good educational system. It's not morally right. It's not economically viable. And we have the money to do it.
We're willing to subsidize ourselves, but we're saying we're not willing,
We're saying it's too expensive to do it on the other side. Yeah.
Also, I would respectfully disagree with Gary. I'm on the council, we've had ADUs before us, and the resistance was not the people worrying about the price. If you don't like the price, don't build one. The resistance was somebody might paint the building next to you green and you didn't like the color and it might show over your roof. It was neighbors who were concerned that we were going to ignore the setback lines or something if we were to do ADUs. We had a family there who had a son who taught in the local high school. They wanted to build one for him. What better reason to support it? And yet the resistance is there. The cost, I mean, you don't, nobody's forcing you to build one in your backyard. If you want to have one or you have one and you'd like to rent it out, that's the issue. And we get all these boulders thrown up, which are obstructions because of fear, I believe.
Well, I think just looking down the road on the ADUs, I don't think we're going to have to build them. I think they already exist. I'm looking way out into the future, in 5 to 10 years. We're not going to have cars in the same way we do. I'm working with the New York Times on a series of pieces and a conference on automated vehicles. And I think the reality is that within 10 years, none of us are going to own a car in the traditional sense. We're going to own a subscription in the same way that we now own a subscription for our TV services and our music services. And we're not going to need garages. And I spent a career building 400 square foot garages across Los Altos and Palo Alto. Because my car isn't going to be my car. It's going to go park, or it's going to go drive people all through the night, and it's going to park itself cheek by jowl with other ones in some parking garage somewhere. So suddenly those 400 square foot garages are totally unnecessary as a parking mechanism. They can be easily converted into awesome apartments with no additional FAR and no additional parking requirement. So I think there's potential for that. And maybe the first thing a city does is says, if you own a subscription to an automated vehicle system, you can convert your garage to a PDU.
So it's funny you should mention the garage because I bought my house in 2012. I remember it well because at the time I was just putting in blind offers, like whatever, I just wanted to get a house. And so I bought this house and the garage was already converted and there was a small Hispanic family living there with a baby. And I felt proud that I was helping them out. And then some neighbor up the road decided to say, hey, they shouldn't be living in that garage. And I got red tagged. And I had to tell this family they had to move out, and there was tears, like the parents come over, and I said, look, my hands are tied. I really want you to stay in this garage, but it's not permitted. And if I was to permit you, I'd have to provide another car park space on the property, and I can't do that. And so they had to leave. I felt really sad. And then, fast forward, my question was going to be about Prop 13 when we got onto the garage. So there is that need, and there's people willing to help, and there's also people willing to point the finger to make those families disappear. But what is your feeling about Prop 13? I understand why it came about in the 70s. And for me, purchasing my house has doubled in value. And so if my property tax doubles, by the time I bought my house, I found myself being a single parent. And that is a huge expense. And so I live paycheck to paycheck. And so if my property taxes increase, I'm fearful. But then I see houses in this community in which I work, and they're $2 million homes paying less than $5,000 a year of property tax, and that seems unfair to me. But I'm also as a single parent, I'm also worried about where I am on the property row. And I just wondered if you could speak to that, and if there's any way of bridging that gap.
Prop 13 is the proverbial third rail of California politics. Prop 13 is to some extent responsible for our property values increasing so quickly because there's no incentive to move. When my previous generation buy a smaller house and move to a bigger house and to a bigger house, because their tax sort of followed them. But why would you do that now if property values have increased and the property taxes are going to go way higher as a result of that? And the reason, one of the reasons the property values are going up is we're not building enough housing. But the other reason that property values are going up is that nobody is selling. So the realtors know that there isn't enough stock. You know, at any given time right now in Palo Alto, there's like 3 houses for sale. So Prop 13 incentivizes people to stay in their house for a long period of time. And so that's one piece of Prop 13. The other piece of Prop 13 is the 50% plus 1 versus 2/3 plus 1 voting for property, for tax increases. My personal view is we're a democracy, 50% plus 1. The president who got elected, not with 2/3, but with barely 30,000 votes in 3 states. So we ought to be able to tax ourselves for that. And the truly bizarre thing about Prop 13 is if I put a general obligation bond on the ballot in the city and just say we need money, we're not sure what we're going to spend it for, I can pass that with 50% plus 1. If I say it's for kids' schools, I need 2/3 plus 1, which is truly bizarre. The state did State Supreme Court did rule a few weeks back that a revision of Prop 13, Prop 218, or one of those, doesn't apply to ballot initiatives that come from the people. So that's going to have a really interesting effect. So a school district could in fact say, we need a parcel tax to support our schools. If we put it on the ballot, it needs 2/3 plus 1, according to this California Supreme Court. If the PTA puts it on, it needs 50% plus 1. So it's going to create a unique set of connections between private organizations and public organizations that probably can't collude. But we're going to have to do something about Prop 13 at some point because it is effectively not fair. When I moved into my house in Palo Alto in 1992, I was paying $4,000 a month a year in property tax. My neighbor had moved into the house very similar to ours. When it was built in 1952, they were paying a few $100s. Well, the roles have reversed. I've been having in my house for coming up on 25, 30 years. I'm still paying a little less than $5,000, but the neighbors have sold their house, and that person's paying $40,000 a year in property tax. So it's, at some point, the courts are going to have to rule on the fairness of this.
I'd like to mention something that hasn't been mentioned. The local advocates for affordable housing do not understand one of the things which is hampering us when we're on the council. Even though personally we're in favor of building affordable housing and we are, kind of very liberal politically and all that, we have been elected by the people who live here, not by the people who want to live here. and that's the problem. So it's very easy to say I'm in favor of building 80-foot high buildings on El Camino, but the people who elected me may not want that, or at least need to be convinced that we have to do it. So I'm really very much in favor of all the state law that kind of tie our hands, because now we say, well, we got to do it. We have to do it the most intelligent way possible, the best way possible, but we have to do it. I'm sorry, but being elected, that's how I feel. I cannot tell the people I don't care what you guys think. And it's not because of, I don't want to be re-elected or anything. It's because they elected me to do something for them. and I've got to demonstrate that I'm doing what's best for the community, not what's best for the state of California or the region in general. So even though personally I would like to.
Well, as a former city council member of Palo Alto and a school board member, I understand that position. I would say that yes, you are here to represent the folks who live here, but you're here to represent the community in its best values and its best format, and its best potential future. And if you believe strongly that that means a more inclusive community economically and socially, then it's your job to go and lead those folks along, not to meet them where they are, but to bring them to where you think the community needs to be. And that's hard work, but that's what we sign up for when we do that. And there's lots of models for how that can happen. And I think Los Altos, quite frankly, has moved a long way in the last 20 years towards having these conversations. These are not conversations that were happening when I first got involved politically.
I know that Facebook still has that program where they offer a $10,000 subsidy to people renting within a certain number of miles of the Menlo Park campus. And I just wondered if your housing, the work you've been doing, if there's been discussions with trying to put a model forward for the companies in our area, which are primarily technology companies, to get involved with not just donating money to this fund, but to establishing policies, because it's obviously, it's totally clear that it's in their best interest to be able to find workers who can get to work and not have an hour and a half drive from Tracy every morning. Is there, have you worked on that? Is there work on
The
that?
Housing Trust has had lots of meetings with lots of high tech, not at the CEO level, but the next level down, trying to pinpoint where they want to get involved. The challenge is they don't have a fix on the problem. They're not convinced that the problem will be the same in 5 to 10 years as it is now. And so they're comfortable with these subsidy programs, whether it's buses, the Google buses, or the Facebook subsidies. The problem with the subsidies is it just drives up rents.
Exactly.
There's obviously a lot of activity in Palo Alto affordable housing. Is there some generally accepted number on how much is needed or how much is enough?
Yeah, we need about 55,000 affordable housing units in Santa Clara Valley.
But I mean, for Palo Alto, it's like,
Yeah.
is there a number that people are kind of
Yeah,
focused around?
the state requires the local regional governmental organization, excuse me, in our case, Association of Bay Area Governments, to put out a regional housing needs analysis, or RENA. Allocation, thank you, RENA. And it puts out a number for each city based on their population, their projected growth, their projected job. So Woodside gets a few, Palo Alto gets a lot, Los Altos gets some. And when I was referring to some of these bills in the legislature that punishes states for not allocating housing lots for them, that's the number that they respond to. It's not a perfect number, and some cities fight it. Palo Alto's been fighting it for a few years. They shouldn't be, in my opinion. But there is such a number.
And does that number include employees like teachers, police officers, retail?
It's by income group. It's not by profession, it's by income group.
Okay.
Income amount.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd just like to tag on to what John said. To those of you who are here who believe in affordable housing, please write letters to the city council. Please come. I know it's no fun to come to the meetings. You don't have to come to every meeting, but the neighbors do. If I order El Camino, the world is coming to an end if there's another 4 feet in one case, 4 feet. And it's very difficult to get 3 votes, which we need, on any of these issues if we don't get some help from you. And it's an educational process as well. This is great. Thank you for being here and helping us be educated. But we need to educate the community because times are different. And the strength of the community is described here, I believe in absolutely. This community, though always high-end, still used to have room for the man who owned the gas station and the plumber. There were places that these people could live in and participate in our community. That's the strength of our community. We need you, is all I'm saying. So please help us, because those of us who would like to see it happen need support.
And usually we get a letter from Sue and for.
Yeah, and that's wonderful.
But like 2 or 3 letters by professional advocates is not gonna do it. We need hundreds of letters from residents.
What's your view on below market rate housing versus rental housing?
You mean purchase versus?
Purchase versus rental.
I think both are great and both have a place in the community. You need a really good system to monitor how the below market purchases work. In Palo Alto, they contract with Palo Alto Housing Corp to manage that process. And essentially what it is you buy in at a below market rate and you're not going to sell at market rate, you're going to sell at an agreed upon escalation or no more than agreed upon escalation so that unit always stays affordable. It could be a great way to get affordable housing built within an otherwise for sale development. And people, there's something very American about owning something. People tend to take very good care of those units. You can stay in them for a long time.
There was something about that clause had been discontinued or something, and unfortunately I'm not fully versed on it, but something that it used to be they had to wait 30 years to sell, and now that clause has changed or something?
No, you could sell at any time. It's just a previously agreed upon maximum cap on your profit.
It's the cost of living.
It's a cost of living plus a certain amount.
Based on the county.
But if the buyer stays there 30 years, if their buyer is 45, however the contract is written,
Right.
then they can sell it at 46 at market.
Well, I think it used to be like that, but I think now it's shifted somehow, and to me, that represents like a lottery. You know, this person has purchased something and a BMR, and say they saved $600,000 with, then the next year they can sell it, then they suddenly become, no?
No, they can't. They can sell it, but they can't sell it for its full market value. They sell it on an escalated, usually straight line appreciation that's agreed upon in the price. The real challenge for these, when they're in multifamily, is, let's say I buy this condo for $100,000 below market rate. The other condos are selling for $500,000. The real problem becomes how do you handle increases in condominium dues, homeowners association, where over time a homeowners association dues could in fact exceed the mortgage cost. And we have not as a society figured out how to make that equitable.
Also, you can resell it for $120,000 and then under the table give 50,000 or 100,000 more that you'd never be able to.
What do you think this is?
No.
He thinks it's plans.
We cannot legally, but I can guarantee you, because there's no
Oversight.
Yeah, no oversight.
There's scrutiny.
No, but there is oversight. In the way it works in Palo Alto and most communities is there's a third-party entity, in Palo Alto's case, Palo Alto Housing Corp, that manages that sale. It essentially acts as a broker to ensure that the sale happens accordingly. I suppose as a buyer, you could give money to that person, but why did you do that?
Yeah, that's fraud for one thing.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank, are there any more questions? We can keep going. It's
I can stay for a
It's about 9:35, and John, I talked to John before and he said he could stay, but I wanted to let some people have pre-set times. We all lead really busy lives. And I just wanted to personally interject that I'll take my LACC co-chair hat off, and just as a citizen of town, I'm tremendously in favor of affordable housing. I think it's a desperate need, and unfortunately, we have a reactionary side to our town that literally puts forth next door posts about, if you allow granny units, then my cerebral peace in my backyard, my peace of mind will be disturbed, not by the color of the house, but by human beings being in the back. So I just wondered if you have had, in Palo Alto, it's so obviously NIMBYism, but what are effective ways to try to calmly push back against that sort of thinking? Because that's going on right now. People haven't been on next door. It's regrettably going on.
My attitude is to calmly just point out the fallacies. And try to bring, question how can a couple of kids playing in the backyard be damaging to your peace? The flip side of it is, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so 7 of us lived in this house over on Harwell Drive. And then the neighbors had 3 kids, and the other neighbors had 4 kids. Nobody has 5 kids or 4 kids anymore. So there's fewer people living in these neighborhoods than they used to, and they're no less peaceful than they were when there were twice as many families living there. And we were feral. We were out in the neighborhood riding our bikes in packs of boys and girls and playing softball and coming home for lunch and then going to the pool. My parents had no clue where we were. But it was a peaceful, wonderful place to grow up. And it will continue to be if a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle or the cleaning lady down the street happens to live in the neighborhood. We used to do this. The way affordable housing worked in America in the 20s and 30s was boarding houses and duplexes and granny units and servants' quarters, where the servants, you can argue the value of cooks and servants and all that, but they went to the local public school. They went to the local church with their families. They went and so on, and they were integrated into the community. I think of my grandmother's street in Milwaukee. There were single-family homes, there were duplexes, there were 2 blocks from a supermarket street or a supermarket. There was a police officer on the corner, and it was a mixed-income community, and it was fantastic.
So, and thanks to 2 of our city council people for being here. Thank you very much. And John, we can't thank you enough. This was it was great. And I also urge, as Mary said, everyone to not just write letters, but to get friends of theirs to write letters. It's always, unfortunately, the same small minority of letters pushing back and supporting affordable housing. Our city desperately needs it.
Thank you.
I don't want to neglect, there's coffee cake. And Nancy promote, great.